Hello guys, Glenn Anderson here and welcome to my video for the World's Strongest Man 1977 reviewed. So we're going to look back now at the first ever World's Strongest Man, which started in 1977. So how did the World's Strongest Man competition come about? Well, for centuries people had been absolutely fascinated with strength. You'd had legends, Samson, Hercules, etc. And then you had Lewis Sear and various other strongmen from decades and centuries ago who had really made their mark and had performed some really amazing feats of strength. And there had been debate for a long time who really was the strongest man in the world. So in 1977 they decided, hey, let's have a competition and decide who is the strongest man in the world. So they got together 8 of what was deemed the strongest guys at the time, basically upon the recommendation of experts, as Brent Musburger explains in the programme. So you had 7 guys from America and 1 Italian guy in Franco Columbo. Now, the World's Strongest Man had never been done before, and they decided to do this a bit different. Instead of testing strength in the traditional way with like a squat, bench press and deadlift, they decided to make some new events, stuff that had never been seen before, like pressing awkward objects overhead, doing a wrist roll, pulling objects, doing a wheelbarrow race, iron bar bending. Certain aspects of this have been done before, but never in this particular fashion. So you was going to have 10 different tests of strength. Like I say, some of these had never been done before, and some of these athletes were bodybuilders, powerlifters, NFL football players, and yes, even professional wrestlers. So because of that, none of these guys had ever really trained for any of these events, so it was quite an interesting thing to see. And so they devised and put together this World's Strongest Man, which was to be shown on CBS Sports and was presented by Brent Musburger, and it was held at Universal Studios in California. This wouldn't be the first time. For the first few years in its history, the World's Strongest Man would be held at this place. Brent Musburger, of course, was a journalist. In actual fact, he even had a small featured cameo in Rocky 2, and there he is in Rocky 2. Also joining him was Paul Anderson, who was a celebrated strongman of the 1950s and 60s. I reckon if World's Strongest Man had have started around 1955 or whatever, Paul Anderson would have been the winner in the 50s, and yes, possibly even the 60s. Paul Anderson would have won multiple times, I do estimate. He's usually credited as one of the strongest guys ever around 1950 or so. So, you know, he not just would have been a contender, but a multiple winner, I do believe. Okay, so the point system: first place you get 10 points, second 7, third 4th, and 4th place 1. I don't know if I really agree with this, to be honest. I much prefer the point system as it would be later on, where the first place will get the top point. So, for example, if you had 8 guys, first place will get 8 points, second place will get 7 points, and so on, and third place will get 6 points. I think that is a much better system, and it's much fairer as well. And then, of course, he goes on to actually tell you the prize money they get. So first place gets $10,000, second place $5,000, third place $4,000. So that's not a lot, really, to be honest. And even in this day and age, really, strongmen don't really earn a lot. I mean, as much as I love the sport of strongman, one of the things that really annoys me about it is the fact that, you know, in strongman, the sport is broke. There's no money in the sport. You know, you literally are, you know, competing for peanuts, but basically, I mean, you can be a boxer or a darts player or whatever, and, you know, you can earn millions and end up buying a mansion, even a football player. But, you know, when it comes to strongman, there's very little money in it, and I think that's really a shame, you know, because, you know, I admire the guys. They really do make an effort, the things they put their bodies through, all the, you know, dedication and devotion that they have to do year round and all that. It is truly a hard sport, and I honestly believe they do deserve so much more money, but there it is. But like I say, this is the first one anyway, so they get the 10,000. He does go on to say they get a bonus as well, like if they win the Tug of War, which is last. But each competitor is guaranteed $2,000, so at least that way no one walks away with nothing. At least everybody gets something, so I suppose that's not too bad. Okay, so let's take a look now at the 8 competitors of the first ever World's Strongest Man. So the first competitor was Franco Columbo, and at the time of World's Strongest Man he was 36 years old. He was 5 feet and 5 inches tall, and he weighed 182 pounds. Franco had been born in 1941. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2019 at the age of 78. So he was from Sardinia in Italy and was actually known as the Sardinian strongman. And he was a champion bodybuilder. He actually won the Mr. Olympia twice, in 1976 and then again in 1981. So he was a 2-time winner of that. And he was actually indeed Arnold's training buddy. They both did bodybuilding together, both competed against each other and trained together. And actually, Franco Columbo had actually done a few acting parts. He'd actually had a small cameo in Arnold Schwarzenegger's film The Terminator in 1984. The next competitor was Mike Dayton, and he was 29 years old at the time, 5'11" and 200 pounds. Not much is really known about him, although he was a stuntman and apparently a kung fu master. Wow! The next competitor was George Frenn, and he was a hammer thrower, and he was 5'11" and 245 pounds. And again, not much is really known about him as well, but he passed away in 2006 and he was 65 years old. And the next competitor after that was Jon Cole. He passed away in 2013 at the age of 69. Now, Jon Cole was a powerlifter and he was capable of deadlifting over 800 pounds, which in 1977 was quite unheard of. It was quite an extraordinary feat. I mean, now, the days at World's Strongest Man, 800 is not considered that much, but back in the late 70s, 800 pound would have been quite amazing. And after him, the next competitor is Lou Ferrigno, and he was 6 feet 5 inches tall and weighed in at 278 pounds, and he had been a champion bodybuilder. And as most people know, he went on to play the Incredible Hulk in a successful television series, and he also competed against Arnold in bodybuilding. Unfortunately, he was never able to win a Mr. Olympia title. He probably could have done so, I suppose, at some point. I reckon he could have if his TV career had not intervened. Then you have Bob Young, who was a football player for the St. Louis Cardinals, and he was 6'1" and 284 pounds, which was quite a big guy for the time. His brother, Doug Young, was also a competitive powerlifter. Bob Young as well, he is no longer with us. He passed away in 1995 at the age of 52, but he was quite a successful ball player as well as being a good powerlifter. And then after him, you have Ken Patera. Now, this guy had quite an amazing, successful career. In the early 1970s, he was a professional weightlifting champion in 1972, and he was about 340 pounds then. And then later on, he gained fame in the WWF, or now WWE, as a professional wrestler. He even had one match against Andre the Giant in 1985, and he would be with the WWF for quite a few years. I think he stopped wrestling around 1988, that kind of time. But he was a very strong guy, and this was his first and only appearance in the World's Strongest Man. Unfortunately, he was he was competing with a bad back when he did this, actually, so he probably didn't do as well here as he otherwise might well have done. And then finally, rounding them out, you have Bruce Wilhelm, who at the time was 31 years old, and he was a Olympic weightlifter and a very good one. He won a silver medal in 1975, and he was 6'3", and at a whopping 326 pounds, he was actually the heaviest and biggest guy in this competition. Now, at World's Strongest Man today, £326, which is just over 23 stone, that would be one of the lightest guys. But back then, he was one of the biggest. So it just goes to show just how World's Strongest Man has evolved over the last 40 plus years, and the guys have tended to get bigger and bigger. And nowadays, giants 400 pound plus are quite common in world. So like I say, Bruce Wilhelm being 326, being the biggest guy at the time, you know, it's not. If he was competing now, he'd be one of the smallest. So he's, like I say, it's quite interesting to see how the guys have increased in size as well as strength over the last few decades. Okay, so the first event, and there's 10 events altogether taking place over 10 weeks. The first event is the barrel lift. So they have to get this awkward barrel that's filled with water and lead shot, and it's just sloshing all over the place, and they have to lift it from the floor, pause on the chest for 2 seconds, and then press it over, and they've got 90 seconds to do it. The weight starts at £150, which is no problem. They all manage to do it easily, so then they move up to 200, and then they finish off with 250. Now, only Bruce Wilhelm managed to lift the 250, so he won this event, and being an Olympic weightlifter, he's good at overhead, so you should imagine that this will be his event, and he only just barely managed it in time. Now, I'm going to be honest, I didn't really like this one, to be honest. I just think it's silly just, you know, loading it like that and making it awkward. Sure, it's challenging and all that, but I'd much rather see them do a log lift. Unfortunately, the log didn't make its way into strongman until 1980. I mean, this isn't like a bad event. I'm not saying it isn't, but I'm not a fan of this one, to be honest. You don't really see it in Worlds now, but they did have it in there for the first few years. There was one bit as well on here where Luke Ferrigno done the 200, but they ruled it out as no because of excessive knee bend, which is a shame because he done it, and in my eyes it was a good lift, but they didn't give it to him. So like I say, Bruce Wilhelm won this with 250, and he would go on to win this first event, which was a good start for him. So the second event is the bar bend, and the bar starts at 3/8 of an inch. And they was all able to do that. So you move on to the second round where the bar is slightly thicker at 1/2 an inch. And then for the third and final event, the bar is even thicker again at 5/8 of an inch. None of the competitors managed to bend the 5/8 of an inch bar within 8 inches, but Luke Ferrigno did manage to bend it within 24 inches. So he was the winner of this event. Now, I don't mind this event. I think it's quite cool, actually, and it does look good on the camera, but it is quite dangerous, and the injury rate here is going to be quite high. You don't really see this on World's Strongest Man now, but it was quite popular back then. Luke Ferrigno actually won 2 events at this whole competition, which was quite impressive, and there he is having a go at the bar bend. Look at those arms. Now, that is the Incredible Hulk. You know, he had a great physique, and he was a really strong guy. Apparently, in his prime, he could bench press 560 pounds, which for a bodybuilder was quite impressive. And he's 70 years old, and even now he's actually in quite good shape. Okay, so the third event is the wrist roller, and they have these 110 pound weights, and they have to wrist roll it 10 feet above the floor. For some reason, they did 2 rounds. I think it just would have been better if they'd have just all gone, all 8 of them, and just done one, and whoever did it in the quickest time was the winner. But for some reason, they all went, well, the top 4 guys went twice, and they did a decider out of that, but I don't really agree with that. I think if they was doing it now, all 8 guys would just go once, and whoever did it the quickest would be the winner. But for some reason, they had like a second round in that, and some of the guys had to go again. I don't really like this one, to be honest. For grip strength, I'd rather just see them do a farmer's walk. Unfortunately, the farmer's walk didn't come into it until 1983. But yeah, I'm not really a particular fan of this. Fortunately, this one was only done a few times, and then they discarded it. And in an interesting turn of events, Mike Dayton would turn out to be the winner of this wrist roll, so I thought that was quite interesting. It was the only event that he won. Event number 4 is the Wheelbarrow Race. So they've got this great big 750 pound wheelbarrow that they've got to push 100 feet, and obviously whoever crosses that 100 feet in the quickest line is the winner. I didn't really like this one. I think this one was a bad one. It's just uneven and awkward, and it's just easy to go all over the place. In fact, Bob Young and Ken Patera actually ended up colliding, which wasn't good. So yeah, not really a fan of this. Bruce Wilhelm would go on to win this one though, which was his second event in winning this whole one. He would win more events in this than anyone else, so this was another victory for the main winner. Event number 5 is the Tyre Toss. Obviously it's pretty much self-explanatory. They just have to throw the tyre as far as they possibly can. Not really a fan of this one either. I didn't like this one. I just think what the ones that they do now, like chucking a keg or a barrel over a bar, is much better. Also, I think with this they just got too many attempts as well, and it's just easy to get tired. I think each of them should have just thrown the tyre once, and whoever, or maybe twice at best, and then whoever does the furthest of the average of the two is the winner. But they actually did quite a lot, which I don't like this one. Don't like this event either. I think this is a bad event. Ken Patera would be the winner with a distance of 41 foot 7 3/4, and then George Frenn got second place with 41 foot 2 1/2. As you would probably imagine, I mean, George Frenn being a hammer thrower, this would be right down his alley. So he was probably a favourite to win this, but Ken Patera would go on to win this event. But yeah, Tyre Toss you don't really see now. There's much more better alternatives for this, in my opinion. Event number 6 is the Tram Pull. They have to pull a tram weighing 8,400 pounds. This one's okay. This is pretty much the precursor to what you have now, the truck pull, or sometimes they pull a bus or a plane or whatever. The only problem with this is they didn't really have a driver, and I think there was one where a competitor was pulling it, and he actually nearly got run over because he was pulling the tram, and there was no one inside to control it, and the tram nearly went right over him. Bruce Wilhelm would win this one. So yeah, I don't mind this. This is good, but like I say, fortunately later on we would see much better things like trucks, etc., and they did manage to make this a safer event as time went on. Event number 7 is the car deadlift. Now, I don't really like this one. In the 1977 World's Strongest Man, when they lifted the car, they literally were lifting it by the bumper. It was just hard to hold on to, and they're literally just lifting it slightly off the ground. It's very difficult to judge, and the range of motion is very small. I would rather just see them either lift a barbell, but fortunately later on when they did car deadlift, they did start to put attachments out from the car and add bars to it, as you can see in this picture, which is much better. It's easier to judge, it's easier to lift, it's much easier for the competitors. But of course this was the first World's Strongest Man, and some of it was poorly thought out, so I can't really blame them too much. Also as well, there was just a lot of events. The event went on way too long, and it was actually even starting to get dark. One of the guys actually said that they was actually losing daylight because the event was going on much longer than it should have. Lou Ferrigno would go on to win this event though, so that was his second win at this competition. Event number 8 was the girl lift. Basically this was basically like a squat in a Smith machine, but instead of using barbell weights they would put women in cages and the guys would squat with them, and they just added the weight up there. So the lift started with 476 pounds, then they went to 526, then 586, and then finally topped out at 626 pounds, and Bob Young would get the winning lift here. I didn't really like this one, to be honest. Luckily they don't use a Smith machine now. You just see them use a barbell, and they have to do it to the pads, which I think is much better. It's much easier to judge, and it's just a much better overall. But again, like I say, this is the first one, and I suppose they wanted to make it look good and all that, but you know, I don't like the apparatus the way they did this now, but that's the way it was then. But luckily it's much better now with the barbell and the pads. Event number 9 was the refrigerator carry. So they've got to put a 400 pound refrigerator on their back and go 40 yards with it. Now, I don't really like this one. I mean, this is the precursor to the yoke, which of course is much, much safer now. But obviously no one had seen or heard of a yoke before. Like I say, luckily over the years they did find ways to make it more safer, but this particular setup in the way it was very awkward and dangerous. So much so actually that Franco actually dislocated his knee, and it forced him to retire and put him out of action for 3 years. Franco actually got badly hurt doing this in this penultimate event. Bruce Wilhelm would win this particular event, but as you can see, the setup is awkward and it is dangerous. Fortunately, this did get stopped after a while. I mean, it is a nice race and all that. I don't have a problem with the actual race itself. It's good to put heavy weight on your back and run with it, which is the yoke now, but it's just like I say, the setup at that particular time with the refrigerator wasn't too good. I mean, the refrigerator would put that back in 2004, but this time they did it in a much safer way. And then the 10th and final event was the Tug of War. Only the top 4 guys would go on to actually do this, which was, I feel, a bit unfair, really. I think all 8 should have gone and they should have done it by points, but again, that's how it was. Normally you would have Atlas Stones to finish World's Strongest Man, but there was no Atlas Stones in this, but they would come along a little bit later. Bruce Wilhelm would win this event, of course. Being the biggest guy there at 326 pounds, it's not too hard to imagine he's got a weight advantage over the rest of the guys. And so this was the last event, and Bruce Wilhelm, of course, would win the whole thing. I don't mind the Tug of War, actually. I think it's quite cool. You don't really see that now, but I don't mind it. I think it was all right. So the final results: Bruce Wilhelm would get first place and would win the whole thing and would be the World's Strongest Man 1977 with 63.25 points. In second place, Bob Young with 43.25 points. Ken Patera would get third place with 34 points. Lou Ferrigno fourth place with 27.5. So out of all the bodybuilders, Lou Ferrigno placed the highest. Franco Columbo would get fifth place with 23.25. Jon Cole, 6th place with 21.5. Mike Dayton, 7th place with 19.25. And in last place, number 8, George Frenn with just 10 points. Okay, so that's it now for the World's Strongest Man 1977 Revisited. So, in summary, it was an okay competition. There was definitely plenty to like about it, and some not so much. So what I did like about it, it was nice to actually see 10 events and see lots of different tests of strength. I do feel 10 is probably a little bit excessive. I mean, if you look at World's Strongest Man now, it's normally 5, 6, 7 events, and that's about it. But back then it was 10. Loads of different ones, some fun. It was nice to see Paul Anderson back as well. As I say, if they'd have done World's Strongest Man in the 50s or 60s, he definitely would have been a winner. Now, what I will say is I do feel a lot of the events were a bit silly and dangerous, and a lot of them were poorly thought out. So much so it even resulted in Franco Columbo getting seriously hurt. But it was their first time doing it. It was a learning curve for them, and they did manage to find ways to make the event safer as time went on. So it was their first time, so I'm not going to criticise them too much. But I do feel the competition went on for too long. I mean, if you watch the whole competition in full, it's actually 90 minutes, which I feel is too long. I mean, World's Strongest Man now is about 45 to 60 minutes, which I think is just perfect. I think 90 minutes is a bit overly long. Also, the event went on for too long. The actual World's Strongest Man for 1977 actually took place over 10 weeks. When they do World's Strongest Man now, it takes place over just a few days, which I think is fine, but back then it went for over 10 weeks, which is definitely too long. But again, it was the first one, really. I think they were just finding their feet here, and like I say, they did make a lot of improvements as time went on, so credit to them for doing that. Overall, I would have to give this one about a 5 out of 10. It's okay, it's fun to watch, but again, it is a bit slow in places, it is a bit overly long, and some of the events are silly and dangerous, I feel anyway, and I do feel it was poorly thought out, but like I say, it's the first one, and things can only get better from there. Okay, so that's it. Please don't forget to like this video and let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree with what I've said? Do you disagree? If there's anything you'd like to add, please let me know. Okay, so this is Glenn signing off now. Thank you very much for watching, and I will return with some more videos.